Good morning, and we're in chapter 18, and we're going to get right into it. Now, the story, David slew Goliath, and Saul was quite happy with that. And it came to pass that he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that's David, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So Jonathan, Saul's son, who is a great warrior in his own right, and the next king, as it would be, really loved David. He really saw who David was, and cared about him. So they loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more to his father's house. So Saul basically brings him in, says, "You're going to work in my house. You're going to be part of my house now, part of the king's entourage," or something like that. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even his sword, to his bow, and to his girdle. Now, to me, when I was reading this, I was thinking, one thing, we don't know the timeline for all this, but it does sound quite fast in this sense. But one thing is, he's given him gifts. Second thing is he needs to look appropriate. He can't look like a shepherd to go out among the people as part of Saul's entourage. And if we look in here, I've just wanted to read that, but why did Jonathan give clothing and weapons to David? By giving his clothing and weapons to David, Jonathan showed his friendship and support for David becoming the next king. Jeffrey R. Holland taught, to a lesser man or a lesser friend than Jonathan, David would have been a terrible threat, a natural rival, but he wasn't. We don't know that Jonathan expected to succeed his father as king, but he certainly would have foreseen that possibility. What we do know is that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So great was their devotion to one another that they made a covenant of loyalty as a symbolic token of his devotion to the newly anointed king. Jonathan stripped himself of the princely robe he wore and gave it to David, and his garments, even his sword, and to his bow and his girdle. So we've got Jonathan making him look princely, you might think, in that sense. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and he behaved himself wisely. They say that several times in this, because it's very important to realize that about David. And Saul sent him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also the sight of Saul's servants. So he's really quite charismatic. Why was Saul angry with David? Which he isn't at this point, but we'll find out. President Ezra Taft Benson taught Saul became an enemy to David through pride. He was jealous because of the crowds of Israelite women were singing that Saul had slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Saul's pride led him to despise David and even attempt to kill him. Joseph Smith's translation clarifies that the evil spirit that came upon Saul, described in verse 10, was not of the Lord, and we would get to that anyway. And it came to pass that when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing and meeting Saul with tabrets and joy and with instruments of music. And Saul's probably going, great, look, we've got all this accolade. They love their king. And the women answered one to another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And Saul was wroth, saying, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed David tens of thousands, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. What can we have more but the kingdom? What can he have more but the kingdom? He's realizing where this is leading. And Saul eyed David from that day forward. And rightly so, but interesting, all of this is happening when David only really killed one person so far, from what we can see, and that was Goliath. But he set in motion them to have the rest of the battle, which they won. And it came to pass that on the morrow that the evil spirit that is not from God came up upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house, and David played with his hands. So David went and played the harp for him because of this evil spirit. We remember that that's what he was doing for Saul. As at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. They should have taken the javelin away in the first place. Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David, even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. It's just kind of like, oh, that was a close one. I'll keep playing. And he throws it again. Really interesting. And Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him. There we go again. The Lord was with him. There's two things that's happening. David behaves himself wisely, and the Lord is with him, and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him captain over 1,000, and he went out and came before the people. So basically, let's stop treating him nicely. Let's put him a captain over 1,000. He tried killing them for one thing, but actually, when he's more in his right mind, he's going, actually, that's not a very smart thing to do, because if he dies here by my hand, all the people hate me for him. And so he thinks, well, but if he dies as a captain over 1,000, we'll see that later as well. And he went out and came before the people, so he's out among the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And therefore Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely. He was afraid of him. He seems to have more influence on the people than Saul himself does. Saul's was a bit shy at the first, and then grew into this kingdom. And now people are noticing David, but all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. He was among the people. He wasn't in his castle or whatever they had. He was a person among the people. And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her I will give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. It's interesting how he says that, even though he kind of says, valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles almost. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. And we'll see this later as well. So that was one of the deals, was that whoever slew Goliath would get a daughter. And David said unto Saul, Who am I? What is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to a king? He's saying, I'm not really king material. Quite lowly, in fact. But it came to pass that when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Methite, to wife. And Michal, however you want to say it, Michal, I guess would be more like it, Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. He's thinking, yes. And Saul said, I will give her, that she may be a snare to him. I think it's interesting that it's going to be a snare to him, that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be son-in-law in the one of the twain, in other words, one of the two sisters. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king delighteth in thee, and all his servants love thee. Therefore be the king's son-in-law. Basically, he's trying to make David think, well, maybe I could be his son-in-law. And Saul's servants spake these words to the ears of David, and David said, Seemeth to you a light thing to be the king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? Saying, well, why is it, you might say, you think it's insignificant? This is a big thing. And the servants of Saul told him, saying, On this manner spake David. And Saul said, Thus shall ye say to David, The king desireth not a dowry, but 100 foreskins of Philistines to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Does this sound familiar? Well, this is what happens with David. And it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. So, where did David get that idea to do that? Remember, Uriah is Bathsheba's husband, and this is David's downfall. So it's really interesting that this same thing could have happened to David. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David, not the words about the Philistines, but about the daughter. It pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Therefore David arose and went, and his men and slew of the Philistines 200 men, and David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave Michal, his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So he's going, everything's backfiring. And Saul was yet more afraid of David. And Saul became David's enemy continually. He's always thinking, what can I do next? What can I do? And then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass that after they went forth, David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so his name was much set by, or adored by people. So, no matter what Saul does, David just becomes better, and Saul diminishes in power every time. And we'll see what happens with that next time.